Season's greetings. I'm Dr. William Lester coming to you from the studios of Blackwater Media in the great city of Atlanta. Welcome to Blackwater Media's 2023 year-end special, a collection of Blackwater Media's best paranormal, cryptid, and supernatural encounter stories from the past year. I hope that you and yours are having a wonderful holiday season. So sit back, enjoy, and have a happy new year. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all once again into this rather dark and gloomy hall of the horrific. I'm your host. You might call me a master of the monstrous, or perhaps even a connoisseur of the creepy. Our tale deals with an old saying, confession is good for the soul. And if that is indeed true, it must apply even in the most bizarre of circumstances. Our story is called A Werewolf's Confession. And full moon notwithstanding, such a revelation can only be heard on the Nightfall radio show. So, here we are again. The holidays are upon us. All over town, the store windows are decorated in their usual Yuletide regalia. Houses are decorated. Street lamps are adorned with the festive decor of the season. We've even had a dusting of snow, with maybe another 2 or 3 inches yet to come. I think that by the time you hear this, the new year should be upon you. And yet, I sit here at my kitchen table, drinking whiskey in an attempt to silence a nightmare, trying to suppress a demon that rages inside of me. It's not stupid fucking holiday depression. It's not some unadmitted childhood angst. The fact is, I'm a murderer. No, I'm not some psycho killer with mutilated bodies in my basement. No, I'm not a coked out addict who isn't above killing just to get high. It's none of those things. But since I'm sure you're curious, I'll just tell you up front. And I don't give a fuck whether you believe it or not. You see, I'm cursed. I'm forsaken by man and God, whatever God is. But I'm sure that God is real. Because if a dark monstrosity like me exists, then certainly something of light and goodness must also exist. You see, I'm a werewolf. Yes, you heard me. Don't waste time trying to play it back to see if you heard it right. It happened 2 years ago. A hunting trip to Canada with a college friend. We lingered too long and let dark catch us. It came out of a thicket and knocked us senseless. It bit me on the arm. My friend fired at it, and it ran off into the darkness. A month later, under a full moon, I changed. I don't know how many people I've killed, but my blood-soaked clothes are proof enough of my effectiveness as a killer. The deaths are usually passed off as attacks by packs of wild dogs. The police know better, but they can't ever admit the truth. And I can't go on like this. The fear, the remorse, and the pain brought on when I change. It's fucking indescribable. The moon will be full tomorrow night, but it all ends tonight. You see, I have the cure. The only known cure. A silver bullet. All it'll take is this one .45 caliber slug and the nightmare ends. My life, such as it is a small price to pay for the pain, suffering, and death that I've caused. So that's it. Whoever hears this, take it as a lesson. Or better yet, a warning. A warning about the reality of monsters and pure evil. Goodbye. And please, please, pray for my soul. It's time once again to gather together and share a rather strange experience. Mankind tends to view itself as king of the mountain and master of all it surveys. But what happens when we find out just how wrong we are? Our story is called The Spaceman, and he's just arrived from a star system on the far side of the Nightfall radio show. My grandfather and his brother, who everyone called Uncle Robert, were both avid hunters. In fact, it was them who taught me the ways of the woods and the hunt. But they told a story once about something very strange that happened to them on a hunting trip. They said it was in 1948. On that particular day, they'd gotten started late, taking time out for a big breakfast and to make a paper bag full of sandwiches and thermoses of coffee. There was really nothing out of the ordinary during that day, and they bagged 6 rabbits, which was great for them since hunting season for rabbits was coming to an end. The sun began to sink as they walked back to the truck, when they started hearing what they called an electronic sound. It's an interesting choice of words since this was a time long before any general knowledge of computers, and virtually no one owned a TV yet. But they described it like a high-pitched hum that came in low and got slowly louder, almost like an old-style radio that wouldn't tune into a station. And then in just the span of a few seconds, they saw something that seemed completely unbelievable. Uncle Robert said it was like a big goddamn top, the kind kids at the time played with. It was sinking down towards the ground in a clearing about 50 yards from us. And it looked like it was made out of polished metal, very silvery, except for some lights flashing around the edges. Now you would think that after seeing something like that, they'd have tried to get to their truck and get away as quickly as they could. But these guys were a different breed. These were men who had fought and beat the Nazis in Europe and North Africa. These were men that did not scare easily. As they watched, there was another strange electronic sound, and something that vaguely resembled a door or hatch lowered. And as my grandfather put it, a spaceman came out. It was interesting to hear that mid-20th century jargon. But understand, in 1948, the word alien to infer extraterrestrial had not yet permeated the lexicon. Anyway, they described the visitor as roughly average size, perhaps a little smaller than they were. But he didn't have hair. They used the word he because according to them it just seemed male. And it had greenish skin and pointed ears. They said that he was carrying what looked to them to be a small object in his hand that also had blinking lights on it. Then the strange visitor looked directly at them, and all eyes locked. Uncle Robert said he started walking in our direction, and me and your grandfather just looked at each other, and he said, "We can't have this." And they raised their rifles. Uncle Robert said that the visitor stopped dead in his tracks, looked back down at that little box thing in his hand, and they could hear that weird electronic sound again. Then there was a bright flash of light. The object rose up in the air out of the clearing and moved off to the east until it was out of sight. You know, I often think about their story, how amazing it must have been to have such an encounter. And you know, this happened about a year after the Roswell incident. It's something to think about when you look up into the night sky and come to grips with the fact that we are not alone. It's always a pleasure to welcome a few brave souls in out of the cold. You may find, however, that the distinct chill in the foyer will offer you little comfort. It has been claimed by the less informed that Charles Darwin concluded that man descended from the apes, but that in fact was not his theory. He postulated that which is still prevailing understanding of biologists and anthropologists today, that man and ape, at some point in time, shared an evolutionary link and then went their separate ways. Our story is called The Ancestor, and when you hear it, you'll wish that that link was still missing. Just some typical Stone Age terror, which is strangely common on the Nightfall radio show. Journal of Dr. Matthew Kane, Professor of Biological Sciences, Howard University, 2nd of September, 1958, Washington, D.C. I saw the crate, or rather what was left of it. Among the splintered pieces of wood, I discerned some of the printing which confirmed a point of origin. Jamhuri ya Muungano wa Tanzania, which to translate from the Swahili is United Republic of Tanzania, along with the motto Uhuru na Umoja, which is to say freedom and unity. But the thing was gone, and that meant the coming horror was all but inevitable. I had been against the whole thing from the beginning, even amongst all of the excitement of the discovery. One of man's distant ancestors, alive today. Yes, there'd been legends for more than 100 years about man-like ape creatures existing in the vast, dense forest of northeast Tanzania, near Mount Kilimanjaro. They thought that the tranquilizer darts would keep it sedated long enough for the ship to cross the Atlantic and then move to a secure research and observation facility in Virginia. They were wrong. Later that night, the night the ship arrived, security officers discovered the bodies of 2 dock workers. They'd been savagely beaten and bore the signs of teeth marks, sharp teeth that had ripped and torn their flesh in the most hideous fashion imaginable. One man's left arm had been yanked right out of the socket, and his skull was... goddamn. His skull was all but pulverized. Blood and entrails littered the scene. You've got to understand that it's likely that this creature gave rise to both apes and men. And by this reckoning, and from what I've witnessed already, its intelligence is formidable, and in human terms, its physical strength is exponential. Jesus Christ, what can be done? As far as I know, there are at least 4 more confirmed deaths, all showing signs similar to those of the dock workers. The Department of the Interior is running things now, so officially, these will be all attributed to animal mutilations, black bear, wild dogs, whatever they can use to keep anyone from doing any deep digging, so to speak. I'm not sure what's next. Shit. I don't even know if I'm officially out of the loop. I almost hope that I am. Every time my phone rings, my heart races. And I haven't been sleeping. If the general public knew what I know, they wouldn't be sleeping either. Because it's still out there.
Delta is ready when you are. Delta is ready nonstop to New Orleans? Call Delta first, the airline that leads with nonstops to the Mardi Gras city. Delta has the most jets as well as the most nonstops to New Orleans. 8 services a day, 3 nonstops. And Delta's nonstop breakfast flight that puts you there before 10 is the first arrival of the morning. Another Delta nonstop leaves for New Orleans in the mid-afternoon, another in the early evening with a delicious dinner en route. If you're going to Birmingham, your biggest choice again is on Delta, and the only daytime nonstop is Delta's luncheon flight. So for New Orleans, Birmingham, or Shreveport, remember the leader. Call Delta or your travel agent.
Delta is ready when you are.
I'd like to invite you all on a most unusual journey. Mind you, we've been on this journey once before. You may in fact recall our previous excursion to first century Palestine. And although the destination is the same point in time and space, the experience, I assure you, is quite different. You see, what has come down to us as a story of betrayal is in fact a terrifying account of sacrifice and release from an ancient curse. Therefore, I offer you now 30 pieces of silver, which, by the way, is the exact price of admission to the Nightfall radio show. Darkness enveloped the city. Beneath the glow of a pale, full moon, the streets were alive with activity. There was music, the incessant rambling of street merchants with their squabbling customers, the scent of roasted goat and freshly baked bread, and the powerful aroma of incense imported from all over the region. And of course, Roman soldiers scattered here and there. Not unusual at all for Passover in Jerusalem. Amongst all this, a lone figure maneuvered through the streets, trying to avoid dense gatherings and keeping mostly to the quieter, more dimly lit routes. The cloaked man had 3 destinations. The first was a door to be knocked on to receive the agreed-upon parcel, the payment being information. The second was another door at which the parcel would be delivered. The third was an isolated area outside the city walls, Gethsemane, and there he would wait. It had to end tonight. With all transactions concluded, he made his way out of the city to the prearranged location. A gentle wind danced through the darkness. He could hear the gentle rustling of the olive leaves. He knew that the others were most likely camped nearby, at least some of them anyway. Perhaps Lebbeus, Johanan, Andreas, even Matjahu. He wasn't sure. Yaakov and Shimon might be anywhere, complaining to whomever they could get to listen. As for the rest, he wasn't sure. He gazed up at the moon. Then he lowered his head, closed his eyes, and whispered to himself, "Forgive me, Yeshua." And at that moment a form appeared out of the shadows, a man bearing a drawn bow. "It's time, Judas. You held up your end of the bargain. The temple guards aren't far behind. The Nazarene will be taken before Caiaphas. Your money was well spent. 20 Tyrian shekels for me, and 10 Roman denarii melted down to make these arrows." Suddenly Judas felt a twinge of discomfort. Then the discomfort became pain, and the pain descended into agony, until at last, the beast, a man in wolf form, emerged. The man fired 2 arrows in quick succession, and the beast screamed in pain and fury, and then fell silent. Only a few minutes later, temple guardsmen found the body of Judas Iscariot with 2 silver arrowheads buried in his chest. They then moved to apprehend the Nazarene. Getting him back into the city without causing a disturbance would be difficult. But Abdel, The captain of the guard agreed with the high priest. It was better for one man to die than for a whole nation to perish. Here we are, together again in this arena of the absurd, this stronghold of the strange. In this instance, I will pull for you a page from a journal penned more than 6 decades past. The journal of a scientist who has, by all our reasoning, a most unscientific experience. The story is called The Living Fossil, and being in a state of prehistoric panic is quite normal for the Nightfall radio show. The Journal of Dr. Matthew Kane, Professor of Biological Sciences, Howard University, 10th of June, 1950, Borneo. A truly remarkable event marked the day. Firstly, our 3-day trek had concluded as we reached a desired research area near the banks of the Capuus River. The region was alive, literally, with a rich spectrum of flora and fauna that rivaled any in the world. Nearly 15,000 species of flowering plants alone, 3,000 species of trees, and hundreds of species of resident mammals and birds. We were in the process, my assistants and I, of cataloging, recording, and photographing, and even taking a few botanical samples when our ears captured the sound of movement, perhaps 30 yards distant and closer to the riverbank. From our vantage point, we could see tall stalks of grass and reeds being thrashed and shaken by something obscured by the greenery. But it was clearly something large, and then we heard more. The growl and eventual roar of an animal. My initial thought was that it could be a clouded leopard, but as the volume and ferocity escalated, I abandoned that theory. And then the thing itself cleared the thicket. The creature that we beheld was impossible, and by that I mean that it was there. We saw it, we heard it, but it could not be there. Though outside of my field, I had read and developed some familiarity with paleontology, and it was that familiarity that told me that this beast was a dimetrodon, a fierce predator that by all rights should have vanished from the world some 40 million years before the dinosaurs. Being naturalists, we understood the dilemma. The reptile would catch our scent immediately, if it had not already. Then we each, I mean the 3 of us, almost simultaneously sought the wooden handles of the revolvers on our belts. And at that moment, this beast out of Earth's primordial past, this living fossil, being at least 15 feet in length, turned its head, looking directly at us. One of my assistants, a man named Thomas, fired a shot, perhaps 2, in the direction of the animal, and I have no idea whether or not the creature was struck, for in those brief moments our gear was gathered and we ran. We ran as though time, space, sky, and earth were nothing. When we reached the Galamba Road in our Jeep, we flung everything in and made off at a fearsome pace. And I am sorry to report that our shock at seeing such a thing diminished our presence of mind, and so there is no photograph to corroborate this account. That in essence is the story. It is now 1963. We each agreed back then to never make a, official report of what happened that day. All that remains is a page and a half in my journal, and the indelible memory of an encounter with a creature lost in time. You're listening to the Blackwater Media Radio Network, the finest in digital audio entertainment. This is Blackwater Media coming to you from the great city of Atlanta. We're often told by religion, metaphysics, and even philosophy that which dwells within each of us, our spirit, if you will, is immortal, and that we in essence never truly die. But what if that isn't the case? What if our inner being, our hopes, dreams, and memories are as immortal as our flesh and bone? Let us explore this terrifying notion in a story called The Soul Eaters. And that exploration begins here on the Nightfall Radio Show. There's a creature known to Buddhist monks, but you will probably never hear of its name. They've sheltered it in secrecy for thousands of years high atop a mountain monastery. Such creatures are made of a kind of plasma. They look much like translucent jellyfish and traverse the space between planets. The reason you'll never hear of it is because it's a guarded secret of the ancient Black Masters. For thousands of years, the order has occupied the monastery, which is built into the rock of the mountain. They rarely venture from it. The impoverished peasants below hold and have always held them in great regard. It was the greatest wish of all families that one of their children would be chosen to become one of these monks. Once every 12 years, the monastery would open the compound gate to choose which children would be accepted into the teachings. Boys between the ages of 5 and 9 would hike with their families the long path up the mountain. The families were not allowed to stay, so the children were left at the gate. The boys would wait outside in silence and stillness until the monks would come and choose. They would be made to wait days without food or water. Most would leave and wander home. Once the monk opened the gate and chose who were deemed worthy, they would be taken within the sanctuary walls. If the parents did not see their child returning from the mountain, they knew their son was accepted. Sadly, however, he would never be allowed out or to see his family again until he was in his 20s. While this was hard on their families, they knew that their child would be taken care of and later in life be able to take care of the family and bring them honor. In a world of abject poverty and starvation, this was the greatest wish and hope of these parents. The child would be dressed and prepared and led by a monk up to one of the higher building rooms. The monk would unbind ropes that locked 2 wooden doors and place the boy inside, standing before the altar. He would then lock him in alone. Spaces in the walls close to the ceiling let in the only light. The altar ran the length of the room, carved into the rock, 5 feet high and 12 feet deep. In the center of this step, a round hole 5 feet in diameter had been bored out. The hole in the stone was perfectly cylindrical, 20 feet down and concave at the bottom. Of course, the boy could not see this or the hole itself, only the thing that protruded from it. A clear, gelatinous-looking dome-shaped monster seemed to sit on the altar as the rest of its body tendrils rested within the hole. While the creature had no eyes of its own, it appeared as if someone had penciled Asian eyes onto its mass, and they stared at him. The boy stood frozen, crying at the sight. The creature did not move toward him, yet somehow drew the soul and life force from the child's body, killing him. As the tiny body collapsed to the floor, the plasma monster would encase its soul in a clear sphere from which it could not escape. It looked like a tiny spark of light inside a glass ball. A tendril moved up from the hole and wrapped around it, pulling it beneath. The plasma monster would sit upon them, all the while feeding off the trapped soul's energy. There are thousands of these balls in the well. The ones at the bottom are dead and used up, resembling grains of black sand at the bottom of the glass ball. Further up the hole, the souls are newer and still have some life left. It takes a few hundred years of draining and feeding before the soul is completely dead. Many believe the soul cannot be killed, and for the most part, this is true. Yet this is one of the true monstrosities, these soul eaters, if you will, that are capable of such an atrocity. Those parents never knew the fate that had awaited their child when they brought him to the monastery. They never knew the horror and suffering that beset him. They will never know how his soul suffered for hundreds of years until it was finally, fully, completely consumed. Now, you may be given to think that this is only a fairy tale, that these things are not possible. The truth is, these plasma monsters are real. However, in their natural state, they are harmless, gentle giants that move through the vastness of space. This monster was captured and contained by the evil Black Order that mask as honorable and noble monks. They who, through the ritual of ancient rites, entrapped and enslaved this plasma being down there for thousands of years in its own prison as an instrument of their black fare. I learned of these things in my work as an anthropologist. But I do not know why they would need this entity to harvest souls for them when they themselves are capable of extracting souls on their own. All I know is that there is a horrible, ancient evil within the monastery on the mountain. And for the people who know this, it's already too late. I'd like to offer my sincerest greetings to all who care to venture into this dwelling of darkness. We will journey to the sea islands of Georgia, where the ancient mystic customs of West Africa have evolved and transformed into a uniquely American practice. Frankly, this is a story of brutality, vengeance, and magic. Our tale is called The Gullah Witch, and there is no better place for it than the Nightfall Radio Show. They called her Mama Lucy, and she lived in an old cabin outside of town, down by Fox Creek. Nobody really knew how old she was, and certainly no one had the nerve to ask. She could be seen each morning and again in the evening just before dark in a rocking chair, and the occasional passerby would wave at her, at which she would respond with little more than a nod. Rumors about the old lady had circulated for as long as a lot of folks could remember. She'd been born into slavery on the old Silas plantation, that much was sure. Her father had been killed by his owner, Henry Silas, and his brother James, when it was learned that he planned for his family to escape to the north, where he would enlist in the Union Army. She never forgot the horror or the grief. In any event, over the years, she showed a knack for concocting all kinds of teas, potions, powders, and even little amulets that many folk believe could fix anything from a head cold to a run of bad luck. But other folks were afraid of Mama Lucy. Some said she was a root worker. Others straight out called her a witch. And there was hardly ever a time when smoke could not be seen billowing from her chimney. One night in the winter, the coldest night of that year, so they say, a terrible scream was heard in the woods. Not an animal, but something not quite human either. Of course, no one ventured out to see what it was. After all, what horror might be waiting beyond the warmth and safety of your door? what evil might be dwelling in those dark, icy woods. Next morning, a grisly scene was discovered in those woods. There were bodies, or rather, body parts strewn about, most stuck to the ground in frozen puddles of blood. They were ripped, torn, slashed, and even partially eaten. All around the area were strange tracks that no one could readily identify. They might have been coyote or even wolf tracks, except that they were much, much too large. The bodies were later identified as members of the Silas family, specifically 2 nephews and 3 grandsons of Henry and James Silas. That same morning, Mama Lucy sat out on her front porch, rocking slowly in the cold, late January air. She looked down at her left hand and saw the red, faded remnants of a pentagram. And for the first time in a long time, a smile of quiet satisfaction appeared on her face.
Season, isn't it? What great happy times, families and friends getting together. Let me ask you, is your house the one that everyone seems to drop in on? Like all of a sudden you got a party on your hands? Well, when it happens, you discover what oh thank heaven for 7-Eleven means. Everything you need in one little neighborhood store. All right, the party's buzzing. You sneak out the back door, scoot over to 7-Eleven, get the soft drinks, the sparkling water, the ginger ale, the Collins mix, the ice cream, the canned nuts, the ice, and you're back home before they miss you. Now that's why they call 7-Eleven the oh thank heaven store.
I greet you, the few brave souls who have dared to venture into this domain of the bizarre. Perhaps I need not warn you, but this is no mechanism for the faint of heart. You see, we've come to think of time by word and custom as a straight line, moving from past to present to future. But before your visit here is over, you will come to believe otherwise. So check your calendars, because the title of our story is Tomorrow is 1966. A very good year indeed on the Nightfall Radio Show. If someone else were saying it, I would call it a hallucination, or at best a fanciful dream, an etheric ode to times long gone, a phantom monument to the golden age of one's life. But this wasn't the case. It was real. It was as real as the solid ground beneath my feet, as real as the scent of the air in autumn and the warm raindrops of summer. You see, I always held fond memories of my childhood home, the home I was born into, the place where almost all that I came to hold near and dear was born. I even drove over to the old neighborhood from time to time, occasionally even getting out to walk around, to touch the trees and smell the grass, to peer over the fence into the backyard where I once played. Well, on one such day, I pulled over to the curb between my old house and Big Mama's. I think I mentioned in another instance that as a child, our next-door neighbors were an elderly couple that were basically de facto grandparents. I probably spent as much time in their backyard as I did my own. Anyway, When I stepped out of the car, I felt almost immediately that something was different. The air, the sky, even the ground. There was something about it that registered in my mind as strange. Then I noticed the cars. Not just the cars going by, but the cars in all of the driveways. They all seemed at least 40 or even 50 years out of date, all except mine. And in my old driveway, to my shock, was something that I readily recognized, but thought never to see again. A light blue 1966 Oldsmobile. Then something impossible came to my mind. Impossible, but inevitable. I had somehow traveled, or had been hurled back in time. What the hell else could it be? I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't hallucinating. I was there, standing outside of my old house. At that instant, I understood that, for all intents and purposes, my present was the past. It occurred to me that I could walk right up to the front door of the house and ring the bell. But what would happen? And who would answer? What would I say that wouldn't make me sound like a madman? And then another question crept in. Was I stuck here? Would I ever get back to 2015? After all, I had no idea how any of this had happened. With all of these questions swirling, I made my way to the front door and once there, nervously rang the bell. A few seconds later, the door opened, and what I saw almost brought tears to my eyes, and I could literally feel my heart pinballing around my chest. It was my mother. My mother, standing there, young, vibrant, full of life. Somehow, I managed to speak. Charlotte Lawson? She nodded and said yes. Then, for some reason, I asked her if she recognized me. I don't know what I was expecting her to say. But what's crazy is that she said that I looked familiar, but of course, wasn't sure. Then I just let it fly. I told her, as crazy as this is going to sound, I'm your son. And as expected, that look came over her face. And you know what I mean by the look. Bewilderment, confusion, and of course, utter disbelief. She looked down for just a moment, shaking her head. I fully expected her to back away and slam the door in my face. After all, that would be the rational thing to do. But that isn't what she did. She stepped out onto the porch and sat down. I sat down in the chair next to her and proceeded to tell her all the things I could think of to prove to her that what I was saying was true. I asked her what year it was, and she said it was 1966. I told her about the assassination of Dr. King, the moon landing, the end of the Vietnam War, Watergate, and Richard Nixon resigning. And every now and then she would throw out a question, and I would try my best to answer. I talked about the birth of my sister and us moving into a new and bigger house. I moved on to telling her about me going to college and then graduate school and eventually having a son of my own. And the expression on her face when I also told her that in 2008, a black man would be president and serve 2 terms was an old familiar expression of joy and wonder. Of course, as an inquisitive and intelligent woman, she asked if anything would change. You know, with me being there, telling her all those things. Wouldn't this all somehow alter the timeline that I knew, that I was explaining to her? But I intuitively knew. Somehow I knew that everything was okay. And I told her, no, nothing will change. It's like a song on a record. The beginning of the song is there on that record, with the middle and the end. Just think of this as you and I being at different points of that song. And no matter how many times you play it, the song is always the same. Every note, every lyric, every time. And she smiled and nodded. We stood up and I gave her a hug. I looked at her and said, I don't really know how I got here. I mean, to this time. But you can rest assured I will see you again. And I could feel the possibility of tears. And I also thought, what about my Big Mama and Big Daddy? Right next door. So much love there. So many dear, dear, sweet memories. And then I thought to myself, no, it will always be there. And so I got back into my car, got in, started it up, and drove off. I can't even say at what point I realized that the general surroundings resumed, I guess what you might call normal time. I drove home. I didn't speak of what happened for a long time. But I should tell you, I did mention this incident to my mother. I told her everything, start to finish. And I asked if she remembered. She kind of looked away and sipped her coffee. But I recognized that old familiar look of joy and wonder.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile found...
The telling of scary stories around a campfire is a tradition that is likely nearly as old as mankind itself. While tales of ghosts, goblins, and murderous psychopaths can rattle the cage of nearly anyone, what better subject for a campfire story could there be than a cannibalistic and murderous Sasquatch? The story of a haunted house might be creepy, but unless you're actually staying in the house in question, it is easily and quickly forgotten once the marshmallows and chocolate and graham crackers appear at the fire. Tales of a creature many people regard as being real, stalking the very woods in which you've pitched your tent, however, are not always so easy to put aside. One such terrifying tale is the story of a Bigfoot war that allegedly took place in eastern Oklahoma during the mid-1850s. The story of the LaFleur County Bigfoot War is one that I've heard bits and pieces of through the years. So let's take a look at the story and see what we can find out. It's said that in or around 1855, a band of Choctaws in what is now LaFleur County and farmers in what is now Arkansas were experiencing some terrifying events. It all began in a rather benign way when the theft of vegetables, a few head of livestock, and other foodstuff by stealthy bandits in the night. The thieves were cagey, quiet, and never seen. They were also smart, as somehow they never ventured into Choctaw encampments on the nights when the watchman was in place. Neither did the bandits ever fall into the trap set for them by farmers outside of Indian Territory. Those charged with finding and capturing these marauders began to develop a begrudging respect for the wiliness of their adversaries as time went by and the petty thefts continued. While the thefts were annoying and did cause some hardships, neither the Choctaw or the neighboring Anglo farmers were afraid of the food bandits. However, things changed once women and children began to go missing. Spurred by reports of these kidnappings, a group of 30 Choctaw cavalrymen were organized to hunt down the abductors. The group was led by Joshua LaFleur, a man of mixed Choctaw and French blood who was deeply respected by his fellow tribesmen. Also joining the search party was a Choctaw warrior named Hamas Tubby and his 6 sons. The Tubbies were huge men, all approaching 7 feet in height and weighing in at more than 300 pounds each, and were regarded as fierce warriors and expert horsemen. The Tubbies were so effective in mounted warfare that despite their massive size, they became known as the Light Horsemen. This contingent of searchers, armed to the teeth, set out into the region known today as the McCurtain County Wilderness Area to search for the kidnappers. After riding all day, the searchers finally arrived in the area where they believed the bandits to be hiding. LaFleur brought his troops to a halt, stood up in his stirrups, and surveyed the area with a spyglass. It is unclear exactly what LaFleur saw, but whatever it was, he ordered his men to charge toward a stand of pines roughly 500 yards distant. LaFleur and the Tubby men led the attack. As the troops closed the distance between themselves and the stand of pines where the kidnappers were thought to be hiding, they were assaulted by a tremendous stench, the unmistakable odor of decay and decomposition. The horses of most of the men began to buck and rear, tossing their riders. Only the mounts of LaFleur and the Tubby men were disciplined enough to remain composed, allowing the 8 men to continue through the pines. As the men cleared the small wooded patch, they came upon a large earthen mound. Scattered across the mound were the bodies of children and women in various stages of decomposition. LaFleur and the Tubbies caught a glimpse of a number of the murderers fleeing into the tree line on the opposite side of the mound. Only 3 of the killers stood their ground to meet the charge of the Light Horsemen. It was at this time that the cavalrymen realized they were not going up against any human foe. Rather, standing before them, snarling and beating their chests, were 3 huge, hairy-covered creatures. Despite what must have been a shocking sight, LaFleur drew his pistol and saber, spurred his mount, and charged. As LaFleur approached the nearest ape, it took a mighty swipe and struck his horse in the head, killing it instantly. LaFleur managed to roll off the falling horse, quickly jumping to his feet, and fired multiple shots into the chest of the creature. Once his pistol was empty, LaFleur attacked the ape with his saber, opening up gaping wounds on the animal, which roared in rage and pain. LaFleur's assault on the creature was so quick, and the shock of seeing hair-covered monsters so great, that the Tubby men hesitated, completely stupefied, before entering the fray. This delay allowed one of the other 2 apes to get behind LaFleur, who was intensely focused on the ape he had engaged. The second beast grabbed LaFleur's head with 2 huge hands and ripped it from his shoulders. The horrible sight jolted the Tubby warriors into action, and they opened fire on the 3 Sasquatches with 50 caliber Sharps buffalo rifles. 2 of the beasts were killed instantly, dropping in their tracks. The third creature was wounded but turned and fled till the lethal shot could be fired. Robert Tubby, only 18 years old but already 6'11" and well over 300 pounds, spurred his horse, ran down the injured ape, and dispatched him with his hunting knife. As the rest of the troop, after gathering their panicked horses, joined them, the Light Horsemen surveyed the area. The bodies of dead women and children, mostly partially devoured, littered the area. The smell of decay, along with the terrible odor of the beast's feces, caused many of the men to vomit. After composing themselves, the men gathered the remains of the unfortunate women and children and buried them. They also buried their leader, Joshua LaFleur. As for the three ape-like monsters, their bodies were placed upon a huge bonfire and burned. Their hellish task complete, the Choctaw warriors returned to Tuskahoma, where it's said that the mighty Tubby men were plagued by terrible nightmares for years afterward. It's one hell of a story. But is any of it true? We do know that the Tubbies existed. So too did a man named Joshua LaFleur. You won't find any official documents that LaFleur died in battle. In fact, outside of the realm of folklore, there's virtually no information to establish that the LaFleur County Bigfoot War took place at all. Having said that, it is possible that the LaFleur County incident was actually based on a real event that took place in a different location. According to a Bigfoot researcher named Jim King, the answer might be yes. King believes the LaFleur County story is based on an event that took place much farther west in Kiowa territory, an event related to him by an Indian elder. According to the story, Kiowa women were placed in a special teepee or tent on the edge of the camp when they started their menstrual cycle. The women stayed there being tended to only by older women until their cycle was complete. The elder told King that women were considered unclean during their cycles, and Kiowa warriors were not only forbidden any physical contact with females during this time, they were not allowed to even look upon them. This seems a bit harsh, of course, but it's not too different than the way many cultures treated menstruating women in the past. The elder said that once long ago there had been trouble with ape-like creatures who were attracted by the scent and pheromones emanating from the tent where the menstruating women were housed. Since the tent was on the edge of the encampment, it proved to be an easy target for renegade apes who were said to have entered and carried off women on several occasions. To make a long story short, the Kiowa leadership decided that this was unacceptable and put together a group of warriors to hunt down the kidnappers. The searchers did manage to track an ape back to its lair and killed not only it, but the entire family unit. Could the LaFleur County story have its roots in the tale told to Jim King by the Kiowa elder? Is there any truth at all, even the smallest grains, in either tale? I've heard that many put their faith in the LaFleur County version simply due to the name of the unfortunate Joshua LaFleur. They wouldn't have named the county after him if it wasn't true, and other similar statements abound. I, however, have not been able to find anything saying LaFleur County was named after Joshua LaFleur. According to the Oklahoma Historical Society website, the name honors the prominent LaFleur family of the Choctaw Nation. Could Joshua LaFleur have been one of the prominent LaFleur family? It's certainly possible, but there does not seem to be any documentation singling out Joshua or his actions as the reason for the naming of the county. The story of the LaFleur County Bigfoot War, even if totally fictional, does seem to point to the fact that enormous hair-covered ape-like animals have been thought to reside in the region for a very long time, a time long before the Patterson-Gimlin film brought Bigfoot into America's consciousness. Add to this the beliefs of many other Native American tribes from across the North American continent, who have long told stories of these creatures snatching women and children, and the anecdotal evidence that grows taller. Truth be told, the idea of child or a woman snatching Sasquatches continues to thrill, terrify, and enthrall us to this very day. It may very well be that the tale of the LaFleur County Bigfoot War was inspired by actual less dramatic events, like the Ape Canyon incident. Over the years, such a story would be embellished and grow to mythic proportions. It is all but inevitable, as a good scary story is irresistible. Don't be too hard on those who might have added to the original facts. After all, we all know that the most frightening types of campfire stories will always have one thing in common. They could really happen. Thank you for listening to the Shadowland Radio Show. If you're listening on the Blackwater Media YouTube channel, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. You can also listen at blackwatermedia.net and the Blackwater Media Facebook page. This story was originally published on the Texas Cryptid Hunter website, which can be found at texascryptidhunter.blogspot.com. I'm Dr. William Lester, and I promise to see each and every one of you again on the flip side. Hey everybody, this is Dr. William Lester, and I want to tell you about a new membership opportunity from Blackwater Media. Now yes, you can sign up for the regular Swamp Hunter Society membership at $4.99 a month and have access to the premium content. But you also have the option of getting the Blackwater Media VIP full year membership. That's right, with a one-time payment of just $49.99, you can have the same access to the same premium content, early releases, at a savings of almost $10 off of a regular membership. So if you enjoy the finest in paranormal and cryptid horror, head on over to blackwatermedia.net and get your Blackwater Media VIP full year membership.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile found...
Converse, Texas is not the kind of place one would normally associate with a monster sighting. The town, while small, it encompasses only 6.3 square miles, is now densely populated and heavily developed. Sitting only 15 miles to the northeast of downtown San Antonio, it's become hard to discern where Converse ends and the Alamo City begins. It's known for many things these days: great Mexican food, the Judson High School Rockets football team, and Randolph Air Force Base, to name a few. Converse, however, was not always so developed and civilized. Like most of Bexar County, it was once not much more than arid plains, rocks, cactus, and chaparral scrubland. Such lonesome country often holds secrets. The area that was to become Converse is no exception. It's said that back in the mid to late 1800s, a rancher moved on to a plot of land near what is now Converse. The man was a rugged sort who had grown up in true pioneer fashion. Some versions of the tale suggest he was a military combat veteran who moved to the area in an effort to put the horrors of the Civil War behind him and live out his days quietly on the South Texas plains. This man had a son who was something of a disappointment to him. The boy was frail, bookish, and preferred studying to wrangling and hunting. This frustrated the old rancher to no end, and he decided to, quote, make a man out of the boy. To this end, the rancher decided to send his son out hunting. He hoped that the boy would take a liking to the sport and, after making his first kill, would prefer the more manly activity of hunting to that of reading and studying all day. The old man put a long gun in the boy's hands and instructed him to go out and shoot a deer. The family needed meat after all. He directed the boy to hunt a heavily wooded area along a creek called Skull Crossing. The boy was reluctant at first and resisted. One way or the other, he was finally coerced into going. The old rancher watched with high hopes as his son walked away from the homestead toward the woods. The old man would soon be disappointed, however, as his son returned a few hours later empty-handed. When chastised for returning without any game, the boy told his father that he left the area out of fear, as he had spotted and been stalked by a monster resembling a werewolf. The father immediately dismissed this wild story and cajoled his son into returning to the area to finish the hunt. The boy did not want to go, but his father left him no choice. Trembling and fearful, the boy trudged back out to the ominously named area of Skull Crossing. Little did the old rancher know it would be the last time he would see his son alive. Hours passed, and darkness began to fall. The old man, the story goes, began to worry and have second thoughts about sending his inexperienced son out into the woods alone. While he hoped the reason the boy had not returned was because he had yet to make a kill, he began to have a sinking feeling deep in his gut that something was wrong. Deciding not to wait any longer, the rancher rounded up some neighbors and they made their way toward the wooded area near Skull Crossing in search of the boy. What they found upon arriving there is the stuff of nightmares. The search party happened upon a monstrous, hairy creature hunched over the body of the rancher's son. The beast was in the act of ravenously devouring the boy when discovered. The men got off a few shots at the monster, but it bounded away at lightning speed. The werewolf, as it was dubbed, was described as standing between 8 and 9 feet tall, covered in dark hair or fur. Members of the search party described it as being some kind of unholy combination between a wolf and a man. The old rancher was understandably devastated by the death of his boy. He blamed himself for not believing his son's story and believed he sent him out to his doom by forcing him to return to Skull Crossing to complete his hunt. The versions of the tale I've generally heard say that the rancher died shortly thereafter. Some versions say he had become reclusive, refused to eat, and wasted away. Others say that he committed suicide by setting fire to his own home and burning up. Either way, it was a sad end all the way around. Did this event actually occur? You won't find any old newspaper accounts documenting the incident. I've looked and came up empty. Somehow, though, the tale has lived on for more than a century. Should the story be dismissed as an old campfire story? A myth? I'm not so sure. There are similar stories involving werewolves and other hairy-covered monsters that live on in the folklore of the region. The story of the Wild Woman of the Navidad, Bear King of Marble Falls, the legend behind Woman Hollering Creek, the Hairy Man of Round Rock, and the mysterious limestone carving dubbed the Cleo Face, all allude to old tales of beasts of similar appearance. Of course, much folklore has a basis in truth. It's possible that the legend of the converse werewolf has its genesis in an actual event. Some believe that if a young boy was killed near Skull Crossing, it was likely the result of an attack by an animal, much more mundane than a werewolf. That's fair enough, but it fails to take into account the description given by the men who spied the beast. The animal was described as bipedal, covered in hair, 8 to 9 feet tall, and lightning fast. Whatever the animal was, it was not a mundane member of the local fauna. In fact, the description attributed to the animal, if given today, would immediately bring to mind images of what is now known as Dogman, or even the Sasquatch. Many Bigfoot enthusiasts seek to dismiss the idea that the converse werewolf might have been a wood ape. No doubt this is because of the alleged death of a human being at the hands of the said beast. Others are not so quick to dismiss the possibility that a Sasquatch is the villain behind the legend. Most who entertain the idea that the North American wood apes might exist speculate that their diet is likely similar to that of black bears. Black bears do subsist mainly on plant matter, berries, roots, and nuts, to name just a few. Black bears also indulge in eating insects, grubs, birds, and mammals when the opportunity presents itself. While rare, black bears do occasionally hunt humans for the express purpose of devouring them. If wood apes exist, and if their diet is indeed similar to that of black bears, then it would not be out of the realm of possibility that a hungry Sasquatch might take advantage of a situation where there was an easy meal to be had. Admittedly, this is contrary to the behavior most often reported by witnesses who claim to have seen Bigfoot. Most witnesses report that these creatures, once they realize they've been spotted, simply retreat back into the forest and make themselves scarce. It must be acknowledged, though, that tales of cannibalism and abductions have been associated with these creatures since time immemorial. Many Native Americans feared Sasquatches and believed they would snatch a wayward member of the tribe when given the opportunity. One simply cannot, in my view, use ancient Native American tales as supporting evidence that the Sasquatch is real, while ignoring the other details of the legend. People continue to disappear in the wild places of North America to this day, some under very odd circumstances. Many are never found. Most, no doubt, simply get lost and die of exposure, dehydration, etc. Others are likely the victims of foul play, of the very human variety. Could a small minority of the missing be victims of abduction at the hands of Sasquatch? The legendary accounts of Albert Osman, Mushalat Harry, along with the First Nations legends, suggests it's at least a possibility. The story of the converse werewolf is slowly fading away now. Sophisticated suburbanites have little time for such tales. As the years pass, fewer and fewer South Texans hear of the legend. Even those who have heard the story tend to dismiss it as folklore. It is a scary story to be told around a campfire or at Halloween, and nothing more. To those of us who pursue these creatures and venture into the deepest forests and remote places in North America, the story has a different meaning. It's a cautionary tale. Fact or fiction, it reminds us to take nothing for granted, to always be careful and aware of our surroundings. You might well suppose that we'll never really know what, if anything, happened at Skull Crossing all those years ago. And I'd be inclined to agree with you. Did a young boy really die? Did a grief-stricken and guilt-ridden father join his son in death soon thereafter? The truth, I'm afraid, has been buried along with the early residents of Bexar County. Maybe it's best it remains there. Thank you for listening to the Shadowland Radio Show. If you're listening on the Blackwater Media YouTube channel, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. You can also listen at blackwatermedia.net and the Blackwater Media Facebook page. I'm Dr. William Lester, and I promise to see each and every one of you again on the flip side.
In my family, we think the wine you drink the most should be the best. We like Paul Masson's Burgundy. It's smooth and rich. We serve it to our friends, and now a lot of them are serving it to their friends. Why don't you join us? Next time you go shopping, you're choosing a wine, make it Paul Masson Burgundy. Paul Masson himself said it nearly a century ago. We will sell no wine before it's time.
Every now and then we gather here in this admittedly terrifying enclave. In a long-standing tradition, we'll bear witness to a rather unsettling series of events, And in just a very short time, you'll understand why this story is called The Stuff of Nightmares, which, by the way, is always in stock here on the Nightfall Radio Show. I wanted to share the story of my dogman sighting, and before anybody asks, I'll give a very general idea of the location, but nothing specific. I've noticed on social media that whenever dogman sightings are reported, there's an idiotic frenzy to try and find out the exact location of the encounter. If any of those people had a real idea about what they're dealing with, they'd never ask. I have told a few of my friends, and they mostly said I must have misidentified whatever I saw. That's sky-high bullshit. Anyway, I'm sharing this with the general public for the first time. So here it is. I was staying in the Catskill Mountains in New York State for a few days. I'd booked an Airbnb with my girlfriend where we could bring our dog, who's a 100-pound German Shepherd. Now, the Airbnb was a strange RV that was converted and expanded into a cabin. The place was far away from any other houses and on a back road which was basically on the side of a mountain with an amazing view. I had 2 fire pits. One was right next to the cabin, and the other was about 800 feet away on the top of a hill. The last night we were there, we were having one last fire at the hilltop fire pit. We had a great view of the mountain range, cornfields on one side and the other side set up against the wood line. We had our dog off the leash. He's very well mannered, and we were playing some music on a Bluetooth speaker. Our dog kept looking towards the wood line, and it was kind of freaking my girlfriend out. We would occasionally turn off the music and just listen to see if we could hear anything. I also had a small LED flashlight and would scan the woods with it, looking for any animal eye shine it might pick up. Well, after a little bit, my dog jumped up to his feet and started full force aggressively growling at the woods, which was out of character for him. Just when I was getting up and turning the music off, the dog darted toward the woods, maintaining his high alert status. He juked left, and I heard something take a few steps back in response. I was able to call him back to me right away, at which point he crept back, keeping his eyes locked on something. As my girlfriend grabbed and held the dog's collar, I stepped closer into the woods with my flashlight and small knife in hand. In hindsight, that was a stupid-ass thing to do. As I was scanning the woods with my flashlight, I picked up a set of eyes, which looked and sounded a lot further back than we'd heard the steps. Now, these eyes were glowing like a dog's eyes in the light of my LED, but the height was what threw me off. It was too tall to be any animal I would expect to see, a raccoon, coyote, skunk, etc. It was easily above my eye level. I figured it must have been a black bear. Now, I know that black bears are very skittish around people, and especially dogs, unless they're protecting their young, so none of that shit was adding up in my head. I sat there for a solid 3 or 4 minutes trying to focus on what it was. And that's when it stood up, giving me a pretty good look at it. I remember saying, "God damn, that's not a bear." This thing looked like a huge wolf, but standing on 2 legs and easily a foot taller than me. I'm right at 6 feet. I told my girlfriend to turn that damn music off and started walking back to her without turning from the woods. I told her that we needed to get the hell out of there and back to the cabin, like, right now. She started dragging our dog back to the cabin, and my dog and I had our eyes fixed on the woods. As soon as my flashlight went off the creature, it started following alongside of us in the wood line. The footsteps I heard sounded just like a person walking in the woods as it followed us. Then I heard other things walking around in the woods. We got inside the cabin, locked the door, and shut all the blinds, and were completely freaked the fuck out. I spent the next hour or so listening and watching out of the window, hoping the animal would walk into the spotlight of the cabin so I could get another look at it. I never saw anything step out, but the sound of the footsteps continued behind the cabin in the woods. I stepped out of the door about an hour or two later, but heard nothing and searched with my flashlight. Now, the fact that this thing was not afraid of my dog was very unsettling, and I've never seen my dog act like that before or since. My dog will chase rabbits and even deer without making a sound. Plus, he always comes back to me when I call him. I've spent a lot of time outdoors in my life, and I've always been able to identify any animal that I encountered. I've asked a lot of my hunting friends about this and asked what, if any, animal would react like that and not instantly run away from a dog of his size. And they didn't give any useful answers. At the time of the encounter, I'd never heard of Dogman, so of course it didn't even cross my mind during the sighting. But then I started researching it online. Let me tell you something. I don't care how interested you are in this subject. It doesn't matter how deep off you're into this or what your level of fascination is. It doesn't matter how hungry you are to consume as much information about it as you can. This creature, whatever it is and wherever it comes from, is the stuff of nightmares.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile found...
What comes to mind when you hear the word werewolf? For many people, the term conjures images of howling, bloodthirsty monsters prowling the moors in search of human prey. Thoughts of silver bullets, the full moon, and the painful and horrific transformation of a man into an inhuman beast may come to mind. Many people consider the werewolf to be a European myth that has become part of Western popular culture only via television, comics, and movies. And they would be wrong. Texas and Louisiana actually have quite a rich tradition of werewolf and other shape-shifting creature legends. While there are almost certainly elements of truth to them, it's often impossible to separate what is fact from what is myth and hyperbole. One of the more fascinating Texas legends is the tale of the Beast of Bear Creek. Older residents of the Texas Hill Country may be familiar with the story of the Beast of Bear Creek. It was widely believed among the early settlers of Kimball County that an old Native American shaman, among the last survivors of his tribe, had the ability to change from his normal human form into that of a large wolf. The old medicine man, it was said, would seek revenge on the white men who had decimated his tribe by transforming into his wolf persona and roaming the countryside at night, killing everything from livestock to unfortunate settlers who were caught outside after dark. Tales of shapeshifters and skinwalkers permeate the folklore of many Native American tribes. But what makes this particular example unusual is that many of the white settlers of Kimball County, in particular those near the old town of Clio, believed the story to be 100% true. So much so that the image of the Beast of Bear Creek, as the monster became known, was immortalized in solid rock. A man named N.Q. Patterson, who lived in Kimball County during the time when the Beast of Bear Creek roamed the countryside, was a man of many talents. At one time or another, he served as the county treasurer, county judge, and tombstone carver. It was his skill as a stone cutter and sculptor for which he is remembered to this day. Patterson apparently was unable to satisfy his artistic bent by carving tombstones, so he took to carving figures into the limestone cliffs and bluffs near and around Bear Creek. Of the many images created by Patterson, one in particular has become quite well known. Dubbed the Clio face due to its proximity to the town of the same name, the large carving depicted a strange and fierce creature. The figure seemed part human and part animal. The nose was broad and protruded more than that of a person. The lips of the creature were curled back in a vicious snarl that revealed terrible fangs with which it could no doubt do terrible harm. The carving was quite large and became very well known in the region. Many came to the conclusion that this was a representation of the old shaman in his wolf guise, the Beast of Bear Creek. Had Patterson seen the monster himself? Was he merely basing his carving on the legends he'd heard, or was the Clio face merely a manifestation of Patterson's fertile imagination? If N.Q. Patterson ever revealed the answer to these questions, no one was ever able to find documentation of it. The Kimball County area continues to be a source of some strange creature reports. These days, they typically don't involve werewolves and/or shapeshifters. Rather, modern-day witnesses are reporting out-of-place mountain lions, black panthers, and the odd-looking hairless, bluish-gray canines often dubbed chupacabras by the media. Lost livestock is blamed on one of these culprits more often than not. Odd screams and howls still heard by the rural residents of the area, more often than outsiders would guess, are simply dismissed as coyotes. And to my knowledge, no one has ever reported a sighting of the Beast of Bear Creek for a very long time. And this is not surprising, considering that the town of Clio is now all but a ghost town. All that remains of the settlement is the rickety structure that was once the Clio General Store, directly across Highway 2291. A building that, according to the sign over the door, once served as the Bear Creek Community Center. The people are all gone now, of course. And whatever the Beast of Bear Creek was, will probably never be known. Thank you for listening to the Shadowland Radio Show. If you're listening on the Blackwater Media YouTube channel, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. You can also listen at blackwatermedia.net and the Blackwater Media Facebook page. I'm Dr. William Lester, and I promise to see each and every one of you again on the flip side.
the edge of the universe, 400 men and women are probing the immeasurable blackness of space. Their leaders are an Earthman with no fear and a stranger with no heart. Travel beyond our time and solar system, into new galaxies, into worlds beyond your dreams. Star Trek, every week, in color on the NBC television network.
Welcome back. I always look forward to gathering together for a bit of fear and fright. This time around, we'll take a peek inside of a diary. Not just any diary, mind you, but one that I'm quite sure will give you nightmares. The story is called Pages from a Vampire's Journal. And luckily for you, there's garlic, holy water, and crucifixes in large supply here at the Nightfall Radio Show. I feel the best way for me to get my story out is to write it down myself. I thought of hiring an interviewer, but felt the interviewer might not survive long enough to finish his assignment. You see, I'm a vampire, and any living human is fair game, as you will soon understand. There is no sanctuary from this curse. No cure can be found, and I've had the best doctors over the endless years try to heal me. Blood transfusions only make me stronger, though they do not satisfy my hunger. I've taken every medicine invented over the many hundreds of years I have existed. Nothing has worked. I would love to exist no longer, but I've not yet found a way to die. There is a demon inside of me, and it wants to walk the earth in physical form for all time. One might think that after hundreds of years I would grow cold and unfeeling to the pain and horror I have caused countless people. That is the true irony of this curse, for I do have feelings. I do not wish to kill, but I cannot resist the great hunger that compels me to feed. The only thing I've found that will quench my great thirst is the fresh, warm blood of a living human donor. When I take their blood, I dare not leave them breathing, for that is the worst thing I could do. Once I pierce the skin with my fangs, the person either dies or goes on to exist as I do for all eternity. I'm careful not to create another of my kind by not finishing the job. I must be sure every drop of blood has been drained. I must be sure that their heart beats no longer. You must think what a terrible thing I am, and you're quite right. But you must also realize that this is a curse. I have no control over my actions. When I am feeding, I feel only overwhelming satisfaction. And when I finish and look upon my victim, I feel a great sorrow at what I've done. No matter how great the sorrow, the hunger is 1,000 times greater. Even in sleep, I find no relief. For every time I sleep, I dream, and I see every soul I have ravaged. They are relentless and are always with me. I cannot forget a single one of my victims, and they are many. Each horrified face passes through my dreams one at a time until I awake from the nightmare into a true nightmare that my life or non-death has become. Now, if you will, I will tell you how I became one of the undead. I do not know when or how the first vampire was created. It is said that it was a spell cast by an evil witch on a poor, unsuspecting young man who shunned her amorous advances. It could have been someone who welched on a deal with the devil, or an alien that crash-landed on our little planet. As for me, I had a fairly good childhood, a loving mother and a hard-working father. The times were much different then. I had a job at 4 years of age, working beside my father. We were planting, weeding, and later harvesting for a local farmer. It was hot, tiring work, but I was with my father, which made me very happy and content. By age 14, I took a liking to smithing and took a job with a local blacksmith. I was in charge of keeping the fire going and the cooling bucket full of water. Every day at about 2 o'clock, Mary Armstrong would pass the blacksmith shop and peek into the open door. She would wave and smile at me with her lovely and rather toothy smile. She had a cute, small-featured, lightly freckled face. I had known Mary since my farming days with my father. Her father had owned the farm at which we worked. I'd always been entranced by her beauty. She had long, flowing, golden locks and deep blue eyes, as deep and blue as the ocean on a cloudless day. I had had only 3 years of schooling, but I did learn to read and write. Mary had a hand in that and spent many hours allowing me to read to her. The fact that she would spend the time with me was all the incentive I needed. By age 17, I'd saved enough money to buy a little piece of earth, and my father helped me build a small cabin. I felt it was time to ask Mary to marry me, and she eagerly agreed, and we were wed in the church we had both grown up in. The whole town attended the blessed event, and the reception was held outside. It had been a beautiful warm spring day, and the party lasted well into the star-filled, moonless night. 9 months later, almost to the day, my first son was born. No words can adequately describe the love I felt for that boy. At 4, like me and my father, I was able to bring him to the blacksmith shop to work with me. My chest poked out so far with pride, I could barely see the ground. With the birth of my second son, my already overwhelming love for Mary increased as I gazed upon my wonderful family. We had it made. The blacksmith was going to move away and asked if I would like to buy the business. Even with 4 mouths to feed, I'd managed to save enough money to make the purchase. That very night, I was riding home to tell Mary of our good fortune. We'd be able to afford a bigger place closer to town, as we had outgrown the little cabin. It had only been a few moments since the sun had gone down. The road was not much more than a path by today's standards, and was lined on both sides by thick woods. Suddenly the horse reared and I was thrown to the ground. There was a loud crack, then raging pain as I realized I'd broken my leg. As I writhed on the ground, clutching my busted limb, a dark figure appeared over me. The only thing I could make out in the darkness was these red, almost glowing eyes. I struggled futilely with the creature, and it quickly overpowered me. I felt the fangs as they plunged deep into my skin and pierced my jugular. All the pain left my body as the creature relieved me of the life-giving fluid that coursed through my arteries. The bone in my leg somehow healed itself as the monster continued to slowly suck the life out of me. Unfortunately for me, a horse and buggy bumped noisily down the road and scared the monster off. You see, he did not finish the job, and I was created. Over the next few days, I began to change. Red meat became the only food that could satisfy my voracious hunger, but only if it were raw or barely cooked. Soon even that was not enough. My family that I once looked upon with love and great joy were now little more than a meal. When I began to feed, feeding was everything. There was nothing else. That night, That horrible night still haunts me more than any other. My wife was soundly sleeping beside me when I awoke, engulfed in an uncontrollable hunger. I no longer saw my wife. I saw only relief from a great desire to feed. I did not merely drain her of blood with my newfound fangs. I actually chewed and swallowed bits of her soft, warm flesh. Due to the animal-like noises I made as I feasted, my son awoke and came into the room. What a horrific sight it must have been for a 5-year-old boy to see. He saw me as I looked up, my face covered with blood. The terror he must have felt as I slowly approached him, fangs fully extended, dripping the last of his mother's once life-giving blood. The young boy's blood was especially invigorating as I drained every drop from his pulsating carotid artery. Then I went for my youngest son. At only 1 year old, his body did not contain near the amount of the crimson fluid my wife's had. It seems though the younger the better, as I quickly sucked down what little blood his small body had to offer. Only after I'd finished feeding was I able to realize what I had done. My beautiful wife and my 2 sons lay bloodless and dead before me, but I was full. My great hunger had been sated. Now I'm so alone. I have no friends, for when I do perchance make a friend, the relationship is always short-lived. It does not take long for my hunger to take command, and they soon become my next meal. My hunger is stronger than any friendship, and sadly, any love. So you see, it is like the wolf pouncing on the hare. He does it because it is what he must do to survive. He has no malice towards the hare, but the urge to feed is tremendous. I've tried to fight it, but alas, it is impossible. When darkness falls, I must begin the hunt. Now, like the old lion, I have grown weary of the hunt. I no longer wish to go out into the world in search of prey as I once did. Hidden in the words of this story is a code which allows me to contact your mind. If you have read this story exactly as I've written it, you can at any time come under my control. You will be compelled to come to me whenever I call. I've tried this before on a much smaller scale, and I have found it to be quite effective. I'll be seeing you.
Here's to good friends. Tonight is kind of special. The beer we'll pour must say something more somehow. So tonight, let it be low and brown.
Let it be low and brown.
It's been so long. Hey, I'm glad to see you. Raise your glass. Here's to health and happiness. So tonight, let it be all the best.
When you're with good friends having good times, don't just have a beer. Have a low and brown. Because good friends and good times deserve the taste of a great beer. And there's really only one, low and brown.
Tonight, let it be low and brown.
I often welcome visitors to this Museum of the Macabre, and that welcome includes a few words of caution. One should always be mindful of the horrors that lurk in the far-flung regions of the earth. And therefore I offer you Exhibit A tale called The Ice Demon, because there is a frozen wasteland, even here on the Nightfall Radio Show. Mark Fitzgerald was the captain of a small icebreaker ship in the Canadian Arctic Ocean. He and 6 others of his members on the 65-footer were headed back to Hudson Bay via the Hudson Strait. This trip in particular was shorter and was expected to be a fairly easy one, but Fitzgerald underestimated the thickness of the sea ice during this trip. Fitzgerald was not the type of man who worried easily. He'd sailed over 100 times throughout the Arctic Ocean in his life, through the empty, desolate, cold no-man's land. He had no friends and hardly any family to remember. His life was primarily his job, which to a lot of people would be a place of grief, but to him, it was hardly brain surgery. He navigated most of his life with that type of attitude. Nothing could ever be too tough for the old Fitzgerald that all his comrades knew. However, his cockiness didn't prepare him for what was next for him to endure. To Fitzgerald's surprise and to the dismay of the crew, there was a leak in the boat. So much time had passed since it had been noticed that the ship had a significant amount of water filling the lower vessel of the ship. The amount of water entering the ship was becoming increasingly dangerous. Icebreaker sinking was a very rare issue, and a situation Fitzgerald never truly thought he would have to address. Of course, he and his crew, with their long-time experience, had had plenty of drills on situations such as these. However, no number of drills in preparation could make the weight of the stress and bewilderment any less overwhelming. A lot of men such as Fitzgerald himself lived their lives never picturing such things happening to them, but only to other people. Fitzgerald and his crew's dread sunk even deeper when they realized they'd have to evacuate the ship. Stranded in such a harsh, desolate, and hopeless place, Fitzgerald and his crew boarded small lifeboats from the ship, desperate to find the closest ice raft big enough to fit all 7 souls. When they did, it was almost a relief. All 7 men exited the small boat and onto the ice raft, where they were able to pull their small boat onto the raft with them. Fitzgerald made sure to bring some necessities from the shipwreck: a small tent, fire starter, portable stove, flares, packaged food and water, some extra clothes, and the first aid kit. It was midday and all 7 men sat on their raft floating in the middle of the Arctic Ocean, taking in the view of their abandoned sinking ship about a mile away. Their grief gave way to acceptance of their possible deaths and the fact that they were stranded in such a place no human was meant to be. As he sat taking in the infinite expanse of ice and water, Fitzgerald grew tired of sitting and decided to walk around their small icy island, exploring the only thing separating them from the -2 degrees Celsius water. At the other end of the raft, Fitzgerald discovered the remains of a huge skeleton. The only thing that came to his mind was some type of pinniped. The rest of the crew had warmed up some of their food on their portable stove. Fitzgerald made his way to join his men, not mentioning his discovery in fear of worrying the crew. They ate, talked, joked, and laughed, despite their impending doom of being condemned to the icy hell around them. The winds picked up and sent unforgiving cold right through them, cold that penetrated their bones. Fitzgerald began to worry as he felt a tingling numbness in his toes. If only he and his comrades had appropriate kindling for a fire. He contemplated lighting the extra clothes he brought the crew and himself on fire to help avoid frostbite. However, these concerns soon grew minuscule. The men noticed some distance away a white figure bobbing in the water. Fitzgerald got up and walked to the edge of their raft to try to get a better look, but the object disappeared before his eyes. He walked back to sit with his crew, who asked him what the mysterious figure was, but he had no comfortable answer. The figure appeared once again out of the water and onto the ice raft 100 feet away. And now the men could clearly see a gigantic polar bear. The men were terrified, stranded in a place they weren't supposed to be, up against a beast they were never meant to win against. The ice bear the ancient beast whose purpose was to kill, and he was flawless at it, and it stared intently at the 7 vulnerable men. The beast jumped off its ice raft and plunged back in the water, resurfacing on another neighboring ice raft. Now, 60 feet away, the bear stared at its weak and vulnerable prey. All the men could do was stare back in horror. The bear plunged back into the ocean and resurfaced on another neighboring ice raft, much closer this time. And now the killing machine was only 20 feet from the men. Standing tall on its front paws, the bear sniffed the air and again stared coldly at the 7 men. The men stared back at the beast's emotionless, small black eyes. They gathered closer together, forming a sort of huddle, as if that would do them any good. It felt like an eternity as the 7 men stared back at the bear's fixed gaze on them. It was as if they were looking at death itself right in the eyes. Never in their lives had any of those men ever felt so weak, so fragile and helpless. There, not too far away, with only a small amount of water separating it from the men, stood a beast that could do anything it possibly pleased to its 7 little victims. The eternal stillness finally was broken as the bear plunged back into the water. Fitzgerald and his men jumped. They all huddled together in the middle of the raft, not knowing when and where the creature of death could possibly reappear next. Hearts pounded and trembled. It felt like an eternity as Fitzgerald and his comrades constantly looked in every direction, continuing to see nothing but moving water and ice all around them, with no predator in sight. For a second, a glimmer of hope arose in Fitzgerald's mind. Maybe, just maybe, the beast lost interest. This was, of course, deception, an evolutionary flaw in the human mind to deny the inevitable reality. As soon as any of the men finished their last breath, the man-eater returned. Climbing onto their ice raft, running faster than any man could react, the beast grabbed Fitzgerald by the top of his cranium and ran with Fitzgerald in his mouth, plunging back into the ocean. The beast climbed onto a neighboring ice raft some 10 feet away with Fitzgerald and began to eat him alive. The now 6 men could only watch as the bear chomped away on their friend, pulling his intestines and other organs out of his body with ease. The beast was totally content while his meal kicked and screamed in pain at the top of its lungs, contrary to the 6 men. They were deeply troubled, and indeed horrified by the screams, squelching, the crunching of bone, and wiggling bloody mass of torn-up flesh that used to be their captain. However, the men could also not look away. It was as if the beast itself forced them into a trance, only to torment them and break their souls. The screaming eventually stopped, and the bear finished chewing on its last piece of meat. All that remained on the island next to them was blood-stained ice and bits and pieces of scattered flesh and bone. The beast lay content in the middle of the mess it made, its white fur now also stained a nice crimson color. Some chunks of matter hung and fell from the animal's face. It was a messy eater. The beast just stared at the 6 men who sat helplessly on the ice raft beside him. It stared intently at its now defeated-looking prey. Each of the 6 men knew that their death was inevitable, and all they were empowered to do was return the gaze. It's so good to have you all here again, if for no other reason than to make sure that you end up sleeping with the lights on. You're all familiar with the adage, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. Well, this time around our tale deals with a young family who learned this lesson in a horrifically harsh manner. The story is called The Red-Eyed Intruder, and it speaks volumes about the unexpected terrors to be found on the Nightfall radio show. My family and I live on a farm in the middle of nowhere. When I say middle of nowhere, I mean it literally. There are no signs of civilization for miles around. Me and my wife, Catherine, wanted a safe place to raise our son. We'd previously lived in a major city where crime was extremely prominent. Hell, we'd hear gunshots at least once or twice a week, though this was nothing new to us. We'd lived there our entire lives. Needless to say, we knew we couldn't raise our child in this environment. My wife wanted our child to have a real childhood, and I couldn't have agreed more. 3 months before our son Bobby was born, we started looking for somewhere new to call home. Somewhere quiet and far away from people. It's not that we were introverts or anything like that. We simply didn't trust people enough after living in that city for so long. What we needed was a fresh start. One night, my wife had called me into the kitchen. She explained how she'd found the perfect place. It was a beautiful 200-acre farm with a large patch of woods surrounding the property line. The picture showed an old 2-story house with paint chipping off the sides. The barn was adjacent to the house. It had a silo connected to the side with vines growing up it. The shingles on the roof were extremely worn and had moss growing under them. "It's gorgeous," I said, glancing at the price. "But that price is a bit sketchy, don't you think so? Almost seems too good to be true." My wife looked up at me, her smile fading ever so slightly, and she said, "I mean, yeah, but we have to at least check it out. If it's legit, it'd be perfect." Seeing her eagerness, and after pondering for a moment, I figured it couldn't hurt to go check it out, if for no other reason, just to make her happy. So next day we made the 2-hour trip out to the property. Glancing at my wife, I could tell she was very eager to see the place. And I'll admit her excitement rubbed off on me a bit as I found myself driving faster. We pulled into the long dirt driveway and parked next to the barn. "Hi there, you must be Joseph," the real estate lady said enthusiastically. "Yeah, nice to meet you." I started shaking her hand. I looked over to my wife, who was already at the door of the house. That's my wife, Catherine. She's very excited to see the place. We made our way over to Catherine and walked in. And right off the bat, I felt something unexplainable. If I could explain this feeling, I would, but I simply can't. My wife and the real estate lady seem to be unaffected by it. The front door opens into a dining room area, which also happens to be connected to the tiny stain-covered kitchen. The countertops had a yellow tint to them, as if they were extremely old. The floor had loose floorboards that creaked with each step. We made our way to the bathroom on the main floor, and just like the kitchen, the bathroom was incredibly small and had signs of wear and tear. There was a horrible stench in the air, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. Catherine had her nose scrunched up, indicating she could smell it too. I'm still not sure where the smell is coming from. But if you buy the place, I could recommend you a good plumber, the lady said, pinching her nose and motioning for us to follow her. She showed us the living room as well as the upstairs bedrooms. Despite the mess in the kitchen and bathroom, the rest of the house seemed to be in decent condition. The 4 bedrooms were a big plus, as I needed a room to work in. I work in data entry and usually work from home, and having a quiet room to myself would be perfect for getting work done. There was just one spot she hadn't shown us yet. The basement. "This place is the basement, right?" I said curiously. She gripped her clipboard harder and frowned a bit, as if startled by the question. Yeah, sure does. It's through that door there. She pointed at the door right next to the bathroom. I waited a few seconds for her to lead us down there. Eventually, I realized she clearly didn't want to go down first. And stupidly, I blew it off and made my way to the door. The hinges creaked, and the black abyss was revealed. I pulled the cord dangling in front of us, turning on the lights. The stairs were too steep for my wife to go down, given she was 6 months pregnant. Against my better judgment, I made my way down the steps. That feeling I mentioned earlier, it was so much worse down here. This time, however, I felt absolute terror in the pit of my stomach. The basement had concrete flooring and walls. Pipes covered the ceiling along with cobwebs. It had that typical basement smell of mildew and old water. The air felt heavy, making it almost hard to breathe. When I got back upstairs, I overheard Catherine asking when we could move in. Catherine, we need to talk about this before we make any decisions, I said quickly. Well, what is there to talk about? It's absolutely perfect. Not to mention in our price range. I could tell she'd already made up her mind, but I wasn't having it. Something was extremely wrong with the place. And I'm not just talking about the lack of structural integrity, but nonetheless, I knew she was dead set on this. Joseph, we need a home before Bobby comes into the world. This is the perfect place. He'll have plenty of room to grow. Just trust me, please, she said with pleading eyes. It was difficult to argue with her. We'll take it, I said reluctantly. We filled out the paperwork and got things in order. I think you two will just love this place. It has a lot of character, the real estate agent said. I almost laughed, but I didn't want to come off as rude. We went home and talked with our bank as well as our landlord at the time in order to make arrangements for the move. We officially moved in about a week later, although there wasn't much to actually move. Mostly furniture and personal belongings. The first day was spent cleaning and arranging the furniture around. The place was a mess when we got there, but after a lot of hard work, we got it looking halfway decent. Now fast forward to later that night. We both had just settled into bed. My wife went through her nightly routine of putting lotion on her stomach while humming to our unborn child. This eased my mind about the decision to move here. Seeing my wife happy made it all worth it. However, this didn't last long. We'd finally fallen asleep. Getting used to sleeping in a new house was difficult. The house would constantly creak and groan. Mind you, it had to be well over 80 years old. The noises kept me up for most of the night. My wife, on the other hand, seemed to have no problem settling into our new home. After about a week, we started noticing strange noises around the house, primarily at night. And now this alone wouldn't normally freak me out. As I said before, the house was constantly settling, and creaking, making various noises. But these new noises we were hearing couldn't possibly be made by the house. Footsteps, whispers, door slamming, to list just a few. Each time these noises occurred, I'd be the one to go investigate. However, my efforts were fruitless. There would never be any sign of anyone or anything in the house. My wife never seemed worried in the slightest. I'd always admired how brave and independent she was. On July 5th, our beautiful baby boy was born. We'd been waiting in anticipation to meet our child for months. I'll never forget the overwhelming joy I had holding him in my arms for the first time. We checked out of the hospital and brought him home at around 11 p.m. My wife settled in, holding our bundle of joy in her arms. As tired as we both were, we just couldn't seem to sleep out of sheer excitement. I laid down by Catherine and Bobby, wrapping my arm around them. We both must have fallen asleep at some point, because we both woke up to a blood-curdling scream. I couldn't pinpoint exactly where it came from, but it sounded muffled, leading me to believe it came from downstairs. "What the hell is that?" Catherine said, her face pale with fear. I slowly got up and reached for my pistol in the drawer. I've never been a big fan of guns. However, I always kept one just in case of an intruder. "I'll be right back. Stay here with Bobby." I made my way to the hallway, being extra quiet so as not to alert a possible intruder. Whatever the noise was had now stopped. I checked all the rooms upstairs, finding nothing whatsoever. The living room, kitchen, and bathroom were empty as well. Not a person in sight. I was about to make my way back upstairs when I walked past the basement door, and chills ran down my spine as I realized I'd have to go check down there too. Hesitating to open the door, I stopped myself. There's nothing to be afraid of. It's just a basement. I can do this. My thoughts went silent when I noticed the doorknob slowly turning. I completely froze, now absolutely terrified. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, cold basement. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get myself to move. Gazing into the black abyss, I noticed something. 2 glowing red dots levitating about 7 feet in the air. My heart dropped even further into my chest, terrified of what was before me. I stood there watching when out of nowhere, the dots blinked. Suddenly I gained all of my motor functions once again and slammed the door, bolting upstairs to the bedroom. Catherine was startled by me running into the bedroom and slamming the door. "What's wrong? Is someone in the house?" she asked, fear in her tone. "I'm not sure, but we have to leave now." My mind continued racing as I started packing my things, and Catherine interjected. "You aren't making any sense, Joseph. What did you see?" The fact she was questioning me made me upset. But that anger was quickly diminished by the gut-wrenching fear coursing through me. I was about to speak up when the light on our nightstand turned off. We were in complete and utter darkness. I froze just like I had in the basement doorway. "Joseph, what's going on?" Catherine asked, holding tight onto Bobby. I was about to say something when I noticed it. Those glowing red eyes, looking right back at me from where my wife was sitting. "Catherine?" I whimpered out.
"Catherine is gone, Joseph. Would you like to join her?"